Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today in this session on how to deploy Microsoft Defender for cloud at scale. Tom and I work as product managers in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Customer Experience Engineering, and today, we're super excited to have this conversation approach demo about how to deploy this thing at scale. So, without further Perfect. So Tom, a few weeks ago, I was actually creating a video about why should you care about secure scoring Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And this, you can actually find it in our YouTube security community channel, where we encourage you to comment, subscribe, all of those. But anyways, it was crazy reading the IBM data breach report from 2021, because some of the numbers that they shared were like compromised credentials was the most common initial attack vector, responsible for about 20% of breaches, or that $4.62 million was the average total cost of a ransomware breach. And at the end, what they were saying is that organizations with fully deployed automations were able to contain a breach much more quicker than organizations without those. Crazy, right, Tom? And then I was actually reading the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, where one of the main points was that cyber hygiene really helps, because taking basic security precautions can actually help you prepare and mitigate cyber threats. At least they were showing that basic security hygiene protects against 98% of attacks, which is, again, crazy. Um, enough about this. This is like a cloud security challenge, right? That is why we're representing this in this slide. And three of the things that we often hear customers mention is that their workloads are super fastly changing. And they're putting into practice automations, templates, rules, etc. But even with that, they tend to be behind us because they don't have enough resources to actually implement those, right? So then you have all of these new threats, and we can see it here, an increase in number of sophistication of attacks. So you have all of these new threats, new campaigns that actually take advantage of war situations like COVID, for example, right? Where you start to receive phishing through email, through social networks, so through so many resources. And at last, the visibility into security and compliance can be so overwhelming, Tom. There are so many security alerts, so many recommendations, and there is no way for customers, whenever I talk to them, to actually say, okay, let's start remediating the security alerts, or this recommendation, let's be proactive, right? So between you and me, this is the security landscape here.
Absolutely, and I think that the modern security landscape is really evolving. So we, as you just mentioned, perfectly mentioned before, we're seeing a lot of changes in how attacks are being conducted, but also in the numbers of breaches and so on and so forth. Now, when we focus a little bit more on the cloud kill chain model, is that something that you could explain us a little bit further?
Yeah, and it's something that actually so there are many ways that attackers nowadays attempt to gain access, right, to your resources, and they actually follow this 4-step process that we have here, that goes from exposure, access, lateral movements into actions. And let me kind of explain each one of them so that we can have this big overview, and then we can proceed with all of this conversation. But the first that we have here is exposure. And threat actors are going to look for opportunities to gain access to your infrastructure. So let's say that we have an application that users access through their web browser, name it Edge, name it whatever. And then threat actors will most likely attempt to attack first the vulnerabilities, right? Or go and exploit weak credentials, which is actually something that happens every single day that we actually see here. And this will lead us to the second phase, which is the access one. And keeping it with the same example, threat actors can get credentials by doing phishing, brute force, and any other type of mechanisms that they can think of. So now that the threat actor is actually in the environment, they will try to do a lateral movement, right? And this starts first by checking to which resources they have access to, the role level that they possess, and if there are any other credentials that they could use to access some critical information and some other type of data, right? And a fun fact about this phase is that when you go and you read all of these digital reports, data breaches reports, they actually mentioned that it takes around 211 days, Tom, to have an organization discover the security breach. Isn't that insane? Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah, and then like finally, the last phase is actions, right? And here threat actors are going to take actions that are going to provoke data loss, data exfiltration, and maybe do other type of campaigns, right? Like ransomware and resource abuse. And the IBM report, and sorry that I mentioned so many of these reports, but the IBM report that I was mentioning earlier actually states that the average total cost of a security breach is $4.80 million. It's just like crazy enough to say that, yeah, we need to take this as a security priority.
Wow. Now we're here to actually talk about Defender for Cloud, and I'm pretty sure that this product will help you cover a lot of these different scenarios. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So as you mentioned, so we have this product, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which touches the hybrid infrastructure, right? So you can protect resources in Azure, resources in AWS, in GCP, in on-premises, like anywhere. We can actually deploy this solution. So the general idea about Microsoft Defender for Cloud is that it touches two things that we have here. One part is the security posture management, which is going to give you secure score, which is a KPI that we give whenever we deploy different recommendations according to the type of resources that you have in your environment. And well, we actually assess those resources and we see, oh my God, this virtual machine has the RDP, right? Open, or this is not encrypted, like you should take some precautions here, right? So we give here proactive recommendations so that customers can actually reduce the likelihood of having a threat actor coming and like taking possession of their data. Then also here in security posture, we have policies and compliance, right? So we have NIST, we have HIPAA, we have all of those other standards that you can actually track to see how well you're doing regarding those. And yeah, you can see here the compliance in those, and you can actually create custom policies, right? So maybe your organization says, hey, so I have these hybrid policy that is kind of like NIST, is kind of like HIPAA, is kind of like, you know, like a mix of everything. So you can actually set up some recommendations that tackle all of those. And then here also in posture management, we have improved automation that we were mentioning earlier, Tom, and we were saying about how organizations that were attacked were like, if they implemented automations, they were able like to react faster, right, to detect faster. And it is something that we can actually have here in the posture management, that whenever you receive a recommendation, you can actually trigger an automation that says, hey, I'll start remediating this. I'll notify this person, and then I'll block these ports, right, in the virtual machine or something. So that is our security posture part. And then we have this threat detection, threat protection that we have for servers, for storage. We have for so many resources that we can actually show right after the demo. And here you're going to get security alerts about what is going on in your resources. We can actually see if you're having a brute force attack, if there's someone stolen credentials, you know, like we can have so many type of alerts for all of these type of resources that we protect. So again, this is actually going to help customers reduce the amount of noise, right? So they are going to have this structure of the recommendations in a controlled way, so that they can start going like from top to bottom, from bottom to top. They can actually see which proactive tasks to take, and also you can adapt your security alerts that you have there, right? So that you can also reduce the noise, reduce false positive, notify owners, you know, like deploy these automations so that the security administrators don't get overwhelmed about the situation, Tom.
Hey, so you're actually saying that by using Defender for Cloud, you don't have to wait more than 200 days before an attack is actually being detected, right?
Exactly.
This is great.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have here all of the tools to actually be proactive, like before reaching that point, right? Be proactive, close the ports, close everything, follow the recommendations, but also like get notified like almost in real time about security alerts that are going on. So yeah, so you don't have to wait the 211 days.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So Tom, what should you do before starting the Microsoft Defender journey? Like, I know that a lot of customers right now maybe are like interested about this because like they really don't want to go into the 211 days. They don't want to be the responsible ones, right? How would you do this?
So before actually starting with the rollout, the deployment of Defender for Cloud, I think there are some I think guardrails or baselines that should actually be in place. And the first one is about, you know, the basic environment, that you should think of a management group hierarchy. We have introduced management groups a few years back, and with management groups, we're actually able not only to focus on a particular subscription, but on a whole cloud estate within the organization of Azure. So if we take a deeper look at what that actually means, you can see that based on management groups, you can manage access, policies, compliance, everything that you can actually assign or manage on a particular subscription on a higher level. That goes up to the tenant root group, and based on that, all the other subordinate subscriptions and management groups are created underneath that root group, and you can basically assign policies on top of that group, or you can assign role-based access control. That is something we will talk about in the next few slides on that same level. Because one thing that you need to be aware of is that Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a subscription-based service. It's a service that is completely relying on Azure. It has its own Azure resource provider, and it is not enabled on a resource or on a resource group. It is always enabled on a subscription. And with management groups, you can efficiently manage access policies and the compliance around Defender for Cloud. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that we're going to show kind of like this in the demo, right? Like we're going to show how to enable this at the subscription level, how to actually manage, right, the policy for the Azure Security Benchmark across like an entire organization. This is amazing. Yeah.
Then I just mentioned before that you can assign access rights, and this is where role-based access control comes into play. Now, what is role-based access control within the scope of Azure? We actually have three different pillars that we need to take a look at. The first one is the security principle, which could be your user account or the group that your user account is member of, or a service principle. For example, you mentioned automations. If you run a logic app, you want to grant that logic app's service principle or managed identity the permission to access data from Defender for Cloud, or to, you mentioned the network security group and the ports that you're closing. You want to assign that security principle the right to actually do that, to work with that network security group, right? And this is where the role definition comes into play. The role definition is the set of management rights. In this particular view, you see how the contributor role will look like. And what you can see is that the contributor can basically do anything except authorization management, which includes deleting or writing new authorization rules or granting access rights, and also to elevate access, right? So the contributor is allowed to manage resources, but not to grant any other person or principal other access rights than they actually have. And then we have to take a look at the scope. And this is where, again, the management group comes into play, but also subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. So you can grant access rights on a resource only, and then at the end, you will see only recommendations for the resource that you have access to in Defender for Cloud, for example. And if we bring that all together, then we call that a role assignment. So you need a service principle, you put that into a role, or you grant that a service principle the access rights on a particular scope, and bringing that together, we call it a role assignment. And Defender for Cloud has some roles that you should be aware of. We have the security reader that is allowed to view alerts and recommendations based on the scope that they're granted access rights to. So if they have access on a management group, they see security alerts, security recommendations, secure score information for all subscriptions, for all resources within that particular management group. The security admin is the role that is allowed to also manage security, but it is not allowed to touch machines, to touch resources. So the security admin is allowed to work with the Microsoft Security Resource Provider, which we will talk a little bit in a few minutes about, but the security admin is allowed to only manage Defender for Cloud, not the resources themselves. This is where the contributor or the owner come into play. So with the owner on the subscription level, you're allowed to also assign regulatory compliance standards and security policies. The contributor is also allowed to do that, but the security admin, for example, is not allowed to assign initiatives based on that particular scope when it comes to regulatory compliance, because that would mean that you also might grant access rights, for example. So you need to be aware of the different roles that we have inside Defender for Cloud. And then you should think of log analytics workspace design. And in particular, it's about centralized or distributed workspaces. So depending on the environment that you're working in, if you have Microsoft Sentinel attached to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, for example, you might think of maybe having only one log analytics workspace for security and another one for performance information and other log data that you want to write into that workspace. You also might think of distributing your log analytics workspaces into Azure regions, like having one workspace in Europe and another workspace in the US. So it really depends on the infrastructure that you have, but you shouldn't start by doing something without thinking about it and then have to rework everything afterwards. And within that scope, there are some common misconceptions that I wanted to touch upon briefly. There's one wrong assumption that Defender for Cloud is automatically enabled on a custom log analytics workspace. This is not correct. Why do I say a custom workspace? So Defender for Cloud can create default log analytics workspaces in your environment, and it will do so in case you have virtual machines in your Azure environment. And for each region, for example, if you have West Europe and North Europe, then you will get 2 log analytics workspaces, one in West Europe and one in North Europe. And the machines in these locations will be connected to these particular workspaces. And on these workspaces, Defender for Cloud, or to be more precise, the Security Center Free or the security solutions, depending on what you configure, will automatically be enabled. This is not true for custom workspaces. So if you decide to use a custom workspace, for example, within the scope of Sentinel and connecting Defender for Cloud to it, you need to make sure to also enable Defender for Cloud on these workspaces. For that, we have 2 different, options. We have the 2 Defender plans, Defender for servers and Defender for SQL servers on machines, that need to be enabled on that workspace. But I mentioned before that we also have the Security Center Free solution. This solution is enabled by enabling any of these plans, saving it, and then if you do not want to use one of the paid plans, you can disable it again, but you don't have to. If you enable these plans, then you will end up having these solutions, like the security solution, which is for Defender for servers, Security Center Free, which is a solution that we leverage to create operating system-based recommendations, for example, for the security baseline in the operating system and for system updates that need to be installed. And then we have 2 solutions for SQL, which is about security alerting and vulnerability assessments. So that is important to think of, that you need to enable Defender for Cloud on the workspace in case you want to use it. In addition to that, there is that wrong assumption that raw event logging is mandatory for Defender for Cloud, and this is not the case. So in Defender for Cloud, you have the auto provisioning capability for the log analytics agent on Azure VMs, and on that, you can select a custom workspace, and you can select if you want to have raw data, raw event logging for Windows security events enabled on this workspace or for the machines that are connected to the workspace. You can also have this setting to none, and Defender for servers in this particular case, because that is the solution that needs to be enabled before, will continue to work without any issue, because we are not looking into the into the log analytics workspace to create security evidence, security alerts. We will pull that information into our backend to be able to create these alerts. So security event logging is something that is important for SIEM integrations. If you have Microsoft Sentinel, you want to set that to common so that all your use cases might be working with all the events. But this is not mandatory for Defender for Cloud. I hope that makes sense.
Totally. And I think that you touched on so many things that I have in so many of my meetings with customers, and it started with like the role management, right? About, hey, I cannot give contributor permissions to like anyone in my organization, right? And then like, oh no, like you can actually go into the resource group level, into the specific resource to actually give permissions, right, to the owner so that they can only reach into that into those recommendations. And then like right now, right, like also customers that say, hey, I have two buildings, one that is in Germany, one that is in the US. I really don't want to like mix all of the workspaces, so I really want to like deploy like everything stays in their region, right? And that we can actually do that here. And yeah, right, that if you want to analyze logs, if you want to use this data for consumption in another way for a SIEM integration or something, you also have the option to customize it right here in this product, which is cool.
It definitely is. So then maybe let's talk a little bit about the deployment itself before we then jump into the demo, right? In order to deploy Defender for Cloud, in order to make sure that Defender for Cloud is enabled on a subscription, there actually are 4 different things that need to be considered. Obviously, you need to enable the product, and I'll explain that. The Azure Security Benchmark needs to be assigned, because without the Azure Security Benchmark, you won't get the Secure Score and the Secure Score recommendations. Then we need, or we might need Defender for Cloud plans to be enabled in order to to have the cloud workload protection capabilities enabled, including vulnerability assessments and security alerting. And then we might think of configuring auto provisioning so that our infrastructure as a services resources, virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, and so on, that they will get the extensions and the integrations and the agents that they need to have in order to be fully supported and fully protected. So when we focus on enabling Defender for Cloud on a subscription, then this is the screen that customers will see the first time they open Defender for Cloud on a new subscription that has been created. And this screen says that we're getting things ready for your subscriptions and that this might take a few minutes. And under the hood, what we do is we will automatically register the Microsoft.security resource provider on that subscription. We will automatically assign the Azure Security Benchmark to that subscription. And we might, I mentioned that before, create one or several default workspaces depending on if you have virtual machines or not. Now, there again is a wrong assumption. And this assumption is Defender for Cloud is automatically enabled. Or I heard the assumption that once I register the Microsoft Security Resource Provider, we will automatically create workspaces and the security benchmark is being assigned. This is not the case. What actually happens is that the first time you open a subscription or you have a new subscription and you open Defender for Cloud with that subscription, there's an automated process that will start in the back end once you open Defender for Cloud. And then this is what you can see, and under the hood, there is one automated process that will assign all these or register and assign all these settings. This will not happen, however, if you have an automated process to create subscriptions and you do not open Defender for Cloud. So at the end, what could happen is that without opening Defender for Cloud with a new sub, you might have a subscription that you think is protected, but in fact it is not. So you won't see security alerts or recommendations for it if you do not adhere to what we are telling later when it's about enabling at scale. Then I mentioned the security benchmark, and the security benchmark can be assigned on a subscription. In this case, it's a subscription that we're looking at, but here you see that in my case, I have assigned it on the management group. And that way I can make sure that even if there is a new subscription being deployed underneath that management group, this subscription will have the assignment, so I don't have to care about that anymore, because I know the new subscription will be there. It will have the security benchmark assigned. It will get a secure score calculation, and it will get security recommendations once I have resources. Defender for Cloud plans can be enabled also on the subscription. I mentioned that before. Everything in Defender for Cloud is subscription-based. So you can select one or the other plan to be enabled. And then we have auto provisioning. Auto provisioning is all about enabling auto deployment of agents depending on the environment that you have. So log analytics, for example, in order to be able to create security alerts for Windows and Linux machines. Vulnerability assessments for machines based on Qualys or Microsoft Defender for Endpoints TVM capability, depending on what you want to use. So you see there's quite a lot that you can configure and that you need to think about. But before digging too deep into how to do that at scale and what happens under the hood when setting these triggers, I would like you, Fernanda, to show us in a demo how you can actually enable Defender for Cloud on a single subscription.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah. So let's start with some of the points that you were touching, right? So there's this that if I go into the portal of Azure, and then let me see here, and then I access to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, then I'm going to have the little symbol, the little message that Tom was showing, right? Because I have already deployed Defender for Cloud here, I'm just going to proceed with what happens. So I would go into the environment settings, right? And then I would see here that in my organization, I have everything as management groups, right? So I have here, if I expand everything, I have my tenant root group, I have one of the management groups, I have the subscription that follows into that, and my workspace that I have. So if I would go into this subscription, I can see all of the plans, right, that I can actually enable. I could enable servers, application service. I can enable all of this for threat detection, for threat capabilities, right? And then Tom was mentioning something very interesting about the Azure Security Benchmark and how this is actually applied. If I go, before I jump into here, if I go into the security policy, I have here made two things. I have put the security benchmark at the subscription level. And I have here like the symbol of the subscription. I have the audit policies, everything that is going on here. But I also did it for the management group so that we can actually see how those look like. And then, yeah. So the main thing here is that you can, like Tom was saying, you can deploy these Azure Security Benchmark at the subscription level or at the management group level. Why would I deploy it at the management group level, not at the management group? You know, like what would be the differences? I think that those depend on the organization, the needs, and the amount of resources that they have to implement, right? But so if I already deploy at the management group level, and then I start adding up like subscriptions into that, then this is going to actually affect it, right, Tom? And so I can here just go ahead and delete the subscription assignment because I already have like this management one, right? So let me just delete it and I have it here. Okay. Now, going back into the steps that Tom was showing, I can actually enable Defender for servers, application services, databases, storage, all of these resources I can enable. Once I enable this, for example, resource manager, I can save it all. And then this is going to be applied, and then it's going to be reflected, and my resources that follow into that category are going to start getting analyzed, and everything is going to be here in the dashboard, right? Then if I go into the auto provisioning capability that we actually have here, that was the fourth step that Tom was mentioning. I can deploy the log analytics agent for Azure virtual machines. I have this on. I can do it like automatically. I can even do the vulnerability assessment for machines. And then if I go here, and this is just like a simple example of all of the extensions that you can auto provision, right? But I can deploy the threat and vulnerability management that we have, or I can even deploy the quality scanner. So let me just install this one and let's hope that it goes all well. But yeah, these were like kind of like the steps that Tom was showing. Tom, I don't know if there is something else here that you want me to show, but I think that those were like the main key points of enabling this.
Absolutely. Well, there is one thing that you need to think of, and that is click the save button, because that is exactly what a lot of customers are missing on this page. You need to save everything that you do, because if you go back there, you won't have made that actual setting. So that is very important to think about.
Well caught.
Absolutely. But other than that, yeah, great demo, and thank you for that. And then I think we can move on and dig a bit deeper into the technology and what is now happening under the hood. Well, if you recall the 4 steps, enable Defender for Cloud is the first one. Then what actually needs to be done is you need to register the resource provider. And that Microsoft.security resource provider is automatically being registered by setting one of the Microsoft Defender for Cloud plans to off. Now this is weird. Let me rephrase that. You see in the Q&A chat, I just monitored the chat, and I've seen that someone from the moderators, he just shared that built-in policy that we have to enable Defender for Cloud on a subscription. This policy will exactly do this. It will set the Microsoft.security/pricings provider for virtual machines, which is Microsoft Defender for servers, to free. And that means that this pricing is switched off. Now, in order to, and here you can again see that link, in order to deploy the Microsoft.security resource provider, it's okay to just have one of these plans switched on or off. Obviously, if you want to leverage Microsoft Defender for Servers, you wouldn't go ahead and set that pricing to free, right? You would make sure that it is enabled. But just to give you an idea what happens under the hood, you need to basically force one of these settings to on or off, and that makes sure that the resource provider is being registered. Now, obviously, I just showed you how to switch off Defender for Servers. You can also switch it on by just setting this setting to standard. So in case you do not want to switch it off, you want to have it enabled, you go ahead and you use that pricing tier and set the pricing tier to standard. We have built-in policy definitions, some of which are called configure Azure Defender for something, and others are called configure Microsoft Defender for something. We have not renamed the existing built-in definitions yet. That is something that is yet to come, but you can just search for it, like I did here, by searching for configure Azure or configure Microsoft, and then you will see all these built-in definitions. We have them for basically all the plans that we are providing, and you can leverage them to enable all these plans at scale. The cool thing with policy definitions is, and now I'm coming back to what I mentioned before, if you have a robust construct with management groups, you can assign these policies on top of your management group, and that way enforce that, for example, Defender for Servers, Defender for Storage, Defender for DNS, and Defender for Containers is enabled on all of your subscriptions. So you do it once, and you're good to go for like a lot of time. There also is a policy reference that we have, and this is about Azure policy built-in definitions for Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This reference will have a lot of built-in definitions, not only for this, but also for other settings, and it's absolutely worth taking a look at that. Within the scope of enabling Defender for Cloud plans, these are the pricing tiers that you can leverage. So virtual machines is Defender for Servers. We have Defender for Storage. We have Defender for SQL Server on machines, Key Vaults, Defender for Containers. Also, we do have Kubernetes Service and Container Registry, but be aware that these two plans are deprecated and they have been merged into Defender for Containers. That's I just added them for the sake of completeness. But if you want to protect your containers, you should go ahead and use the new containers plan. And then you just showed auto provisioning on one subscription, but the good and the bad thing with Defender for Cloud is that every setting will apply to a particular subscription. The good news is that you can also leverage Azure Policy to deploy the auto provisioning capabilities. What you see here is AEC auto provisioning for vulnerability assessment agent on machines. You have auto provisioning for Azure Arc on Linux and on Windows. So this is about the log analytics extension. We have Defender for Containers, including the security, the Defender profile, and the Azure Policy add-on for both Azure VMs and non-Azure machines that are connected through Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And all the other settings are also based on policies. So what we will see in a later demo is that by basically just enabling that toggle switch that Fernanda just showed, you will have an automated assignment of a built-in policy definition to this particular subscription. And then again, knowing that, you can go ahead, take the same built-in policy definition and assign it on your management group with all the same settings. And that way you can make sure that all your machines will get the log analytics extension. All your machines will have Microsoft Defender for Endpoints, TVM, vulnerability assessment capability deployed, and so on and so forth. And I mentioned we do have all these built-in policy definitions. And what I did here is these are the settings that you have seen in the auto provisioning view that Fernanda just showed. And these are the corresponding policy definitions that we have that you can leverage for that. So with Azure Policy, you can basically make sure, if you know what to do, how to completely deploy Defender for Cloud at scale across your whole estate. And with no further ado, I want to give it back to you, Fernanda, to lead us through the demo.
Perfect. Okay. So just mentioning very quickly, so we actually did the vulnerability assessment for machines, right? We enabled this one, and then I had previously deployed also the guest configuration agent, Tom. So let's see like how does that look like and how you were showing it, right, in your presentation. So I would go ahead and go again into the portal of Azure and then go and click into policy. Then I can see here all of the changes that I did, right? I had here previously the Azure Security Benchmark was not at the scope that I wanted. It was like at two different scopes, right? It was at the subscription level and also at the management group level. So I can see it from here in this overview page. But then if I go into assignments, I can actually see from here all of the provisioning that I did. So I have here for the guest configuration agent, which was this one, right? So I have it here. I also have here the auto provisioning for the vulnerability assessment agent, which was actually this one that Tom actually told me save it so that you can actually see it. So we have it there. So yeah, so you can actually see all of these assignments that you have deployed because of the auto provisioning capability. And then like if you go ahead here, you can see all of the parameters that are taken here into consideration. For example, the MDE, TBM, you have all of these. You can also edit like the assignments. You can actually change the scope level that you want. You can do other types of things here, right? So that would be mainly the ones that I just deployed here. Now, if I go again and I show the other thing that Tom was showing, the configure Azure Defender, right? I have here many options, and yeah, I have here as an Azure. I didn't put here Microsoft. Tom was saying, this is a work in progress. So yeah, so here I'm just showing the configure Azure Defender to be enabled, for example, on SQL servers or on storage, right? And you can actually go again here and see which are like the parameters that are going to take place in these policies, right? Because again, you need to test this in a non-productive environment so you can see like how this is going to behave, right? So here, and this is something that Tom was actually showing. When I go into the deployment category here, I can see here that the pricing tier changes to standard, right? Which is something that it is going to mean that we have actually enabled the threat capability, the detection capability for this specific type of resource. And then, yeah, so you can actually see from here all of these. You can also assign these. It's the same user experience, right? You can decide the scope level, if you want to use a subscription, if you want to use a management group, you can use all of those for doing it at scale. Now, if, for example, I go again here into definitions and I just click here on enable security center auto provisioning, for example, for log analytics workspace. Tom was mentioning at the beginning that we have the option, right, Tom, to do a custom workspace or to just let Defender for Cloud decide the workspaces that it wants, right? So if I have if I have 50% of my virtual machines are deployed in Europe, and then 50% are deployed in US, then Defender for Cloud, what it's going to do is that it's going to actually create two different workspaces, right? One that is deployed in Europe and the other that is deployed in the US, and that is automatic. But I can also say, hey, you know what? I need everything to be concentrated. I don't want to distinguish regions. I just want everything to be concentrated, or like to do a custom workspace. So I can actually go again here click on this Enable Security Center's auto provisioning of the Log Analytics agent with custom workspace. And I can see here all of the information, right, that is saying. Again, it's kind of like the same thing that I was showing before, but here we have this variable that is the workspace ID and the scope, which is something that once we go into the assignment, we can actually define which is the Log Analytics workspace that we want to use here. So here I'm not going to see anything because I haven't defined here the scope. So if I define here the scope, I say, hey, just check the entire management group. Okay, so I just want here to check the entire management group, and then I want here to load all of the options that I have, that hopefully it is going to do it, but maybe not. Let's see. Oh, it's taking, okay. So here I have here, I can decide here the subscription what I want like to take into consideration, and then the workspaces that follow under that specific subscription. So I just had to go again here and click here so that I can show this part, and then I can define the workspace that I want. So I can select it, and well, that would be like the custom workspace, right, Tom? Right. So this is actually something that we can do at scale so that we don't go it's subscription by subscription to enable this. So this is actually like very helpful to do. I don't know, Tom, if there is something else from here that we need to show.
I think that was a great demo. And yeah, as you said, you can use all these policies on all those scopes. You've just shown it that you can basically assign the auto provisioning capability on top of the management group. And what will happen under the hood is that all these subscriptions will get the same setting, right? And then with that, we are able to basically, deploy the same setting across your whole estate. And this is how deployment at scale will work in Defender for Cloud.
Exactly. And this is so helpful, right? Whenever you don't want to do like the manual work, right? Because I think that there are so many customers that also come to us and they mention how they have like 1,000 subscriptions, right? And they're continuing to create more and more and more. And they want to have all of these in a specific way so that they can monitor them, they can apply policies, they can actually do automations, and they can actually react to those. And this is like the easiest way, right? Just going and deploying these policies, defining the custom workspaces or the default workspaces, define if you want TVM or if you want Qualys, right? You can do it all at scale by using these policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's only coming down to those 4 different steps that we mentioned before already. And I just want to summarize it again to make sure that this is really understood. Because what we need to do is only to enable Defender for Cloud by registering the Microsoft.Security resource provider. That will happen whenever you switch off a Defender for Cloud plan, or if you switch on, enable a Defender for Cloud plan, or all the plans, maybe, if you want to, using policies. That comes directly down to step 1, and step 3 actually is pretty much the same depending on the environment, right? If you want to enable or disable the plans. Then you assign the security benchmark, and that is a one-time task. So you assign the Azure Security Benchmark on top of the management group. The Azure Security Benchmark initiative is maintained by Microsoft, so we make sure to add new recommendations, new policies to this initiative. And at the same time, these recommendations will then show up in Defender for Cloud for all resources in all subscriptions. And again, configuring of auto provisioning capabilities. Deploy the Log Analytics agent, the Log Analytics extension to Azure Arc. Make sure that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint integration is enabled, which is enabled by default on a subscription. So you just have to enable Defender for servers, either plan 1 or plan 2. And then we make sure that MDE is deployed to these machines. Vulnerability assessment capabilities, if you want to use MDE TVM or Qualys, The guest configuration policy extension that we have in order to be able to look into the operating system based on the guest config policies, not only on the log analytics agent. And then we have the auto provisioning capabilities for Microsoft Defender for containers. That includes 4 policies in one initiative, including the daemon set that is being deployed to Azure VMs and non-Azure machines connected through Azure Arc, and the Azure Policy add-on that again can be deployed to both Azure VMs and non-Azure machines connected through Azure Arc. And that actually is it, right? So we have built-in policy definitions for all of these settings. You just need to understand what happens under the hood in order to be able to make an educated decision about your design, your deployment, and what policies you want to assign on what level. And then you're good to go. Once you have assigned the policies, everything happens under the hood, and that is what we call deployment at scale. And with that, I think we have some minutes left for one or the other questions. So if there are questions in the chat, maybe one of the moderators can unmute themselves and ask them.
Yeah, we do have a few questions here.
Okay.
Let's see. The first question is it possible to process the security alerts by wiring them to an Azure function? For example, for maybe setting up an effective response to those alerts?
It absolutely is. Fernanda mentioned that at the very beginning when we've been talking about automations. And what you can do is leverage the workflow automation capability. With workflow automation, we are able to react, for example, on a new security alert that is being created. And this will stimulate a logic app under the hood. So we will basically send an alert JSON, including all the alert information. For example, let's take a brute force attack alert, for example. There is alert information about the attacker's IP address or addresses, if it's more than one address that is being used, information about the accounts that have been used, information about the number of failed or successful login attempts. And all this information is being sent to the logic app. And then you can take the information and do some smart configurations, for example. Like we do have a logic app for blocking brute force attack that you can find in our GitHub repository that will take the alert information and will block the IP addresses that are coming from the attacker in the machine's network security group, so that we can stop the attack basically directly on the network layer.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what all agents will be installed if I deploy MDC?
So actually, all these agents that Fernanda just showed in the auto provisioning settings. So it's about the log analytics agent that we need to have in order to look into the OS and to create security alerts for based on Defender for servers. By integrating Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, we are either deploying the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint sensor or activating it in Windows Server 2019 onwards, where it is built into the operating system. And then it's about it depends on the rest of your machines and your environment. If you have a machine that is not an Azure VM, you need to have Azure Arc connected to that machine, and Azure Arc is an agent that is deployed to that machine. And if you have Azure Arc, then we are using extensions that are basically attached to Azure Arc. So we are then able to provide you with all these settings. But the agents, to get an overview of the agents, you take a look at the auto provisioning view in Defender for Cloud, and that is all that can be deployed to virtual machines and to AKS machines, so or Kubernetes clusters in or outside of Azure.
Okay, and what is the purpose of enabling Defender for Cloud on just log analytics workspace?
Actually, you do not do that. You can do it, but it's not something that we would encourage customers to do. The reason is that there are some capabilities that rely on log analytics, and this is when Microsoft Defender for Servers P2 comes into play, because within that scope, we see that happens. If you enable Defender for Servers P2, and that is the security solution that we just showcased earlier in the slides, if you enable that on the log analytics workspace, you will only have access to agent-based capabilities that include security alerting, for example, but it won't include for example, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint integration and deployment on Linux machines and on Windows Server 2019 onwards. It also won't include just-in-time VM access for Azure VMs. That is something that is not agent-based, but that is based on enabling Defender for Servers on the subscription. So this is why I said before that you need to make sure to have enabled Defender for Cloud on the subscription and on the workspace. That is then the Security Center free solution, or that you need to enable Defender for Servers on both the subscription and the workspace in order to get full feature coverage.
Okay, thank you. We have lots of questions here. 1 second. Just looking through the questions. Let's see. Oh, that one's already answered. One moment, sorry.
While Ashley is looking for more, I think this is a good one. There is a question if it's a good idea to use one analytics workspace per AZ region for multiple sources, or do you separate them by the logically or hierarchically into the workspace for one under security, matrix from the resources, or events from various sources, so even more divided?
I think that depends on the infrastructure that you're looking at. If that is integrated with Sentinel, for example, then Sentinel will be charged based on the amount of data that you're storing in the workspace. And in this case, it might make sense to divide between a security-based log analytics workspace that Sentinel has enabled and another workspace for example, for performance logs or other information that is not security relevant. From a Defender for Cloud perspective, it actually doesn't make a difference. It just needs to be a workspace that is that has that capability enabled on it, so we are able to leverage the solution to create security alerts and to give you all the agent-based capabilities. So there is no definite answer for that. It really depends on the scenario and if you want to connect it with Sentinel or not. So it's something we would have to take a deeper look at in order to give the right answer for it.
Well, thank you, Tom, for the thorough explanation. We're over the hour here. Ashley, back to you. Perhaps we can answer the. There's more questions that are coming in, but we can always take those offline and perhaps include answers as part of the deck appendix that we normally share with the audience. So back to you, Ashley.
Okay, and any additional questions, you can also ask them on our Q&A overflow at aka.ms/MDC community. And thank you to Fernanda and Tom for being our guests today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer all of the questions. At the same time, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. Thank you, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.